Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous podcasts and blogs around the internet. His work can be found on Cover 32, Cold Omaha, and he is both a useful human and what is the term that was used to describe you earlier? Bangladeshi Beefcake, Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing?
This is when Reddit memes just get out of control, man. I have no idea where this comes from.
Is that what that was from? Because I've always preferred canary in a skull mine or Bengali in a skull mine, but the Bengali Beefcake really does sound like a Michael Buffer intro.
It was I was just in a chat for one of my fantasy leagues, and I somewhat had mentioned that I was Indian. I was like, well, it's kind of close in Bengali, and then they just started calling me the Bengali Beefcake for no reason, which is kind of how all these jokes start. But yeah, that's what's happening now.
That is a thing. So we can look forward to your next fundraising adventure. Being this is the paywall for Cover 32. If you pay this with your monthly subscription, you can get both the football phone and the Bengali Beefcake T-shirt. It's the football or the flip football phone. That's what really helps sell it. I feel like we need to talk to somebody about putting this stuff together. How's your summer going? Have you done anything interesting, or are you trying to avoid the sun like most writers?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely trying to avoid the sun. We're trying to figure out this air conditioning thing because I've moved to an apartment now. We have to install our own air conditioning, but the cord's not long enough, and it violates fire code, I guess, to get an extension cord. So we're just kind of boiling in my apartment too. But I did just come back from a wedding. My cousin got married. That was cool. And I was also, right before that, I was at an analytics conference in Stevens Point, which is really fun.
Stevens Point, where is that exactly?
The other side of Wisconsin. It's far away as opposed to close, I guess, from Minneapolis.
Much closer to Milwaukee than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least that was my experience. It's a 3.5 hour drive. So somewhere 3.5 hours away from Minneapolis.
Wasn't really paying attention. After Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin starts to look the same.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's there's the discount water park, and oh, wow, it's flat. Great.
Well, see, I've been trying to be more active and be more outgoing and be and exercise and try to live a little bit better and maybe socialize a little bit more. So what do? I decide that what I'm going to do is start playing guitar and just do that inside the house all the time. So I feel like I'm shooting myself in the foot by doing all of this, but I'm almost being productive.
I mean that's the same thing. Yeah, no, that's good.
You can't really go on walks and play electric guitar or anything, but I mean, you can try, but it doesn't really work like that. But there's
I'm proud of you.
Why, thank you. There's a video game that is associated with it. I think it's called Rocksmith. So I've just hooked that up to my Xbox One and try to play that. And it's actually it's pretty cool to start on. And has been a wonderful waste of my time, or not waste of my time, but it's been a wonderful usage of my time over the past couple of weeks. I'm not terrible at it. I'm not good, but I'm not terrible at it. So I'm considering that to be a win. But yeah, I'm not being out and about as much as I want to be. Instead, I am staying home and trying to figure out power chords, which I feel like that's a decent usage of time, money, resources, and air conditioning.
Yeah.
Since I have access to all of these, especially the air conditioning part. I didn't know you didn't have much in the way of air conditioning. I feel like I can send pictures of my thermostat to you, since my place is appropriately air conditioned.
Yeah, that'll make me feel a lot better. Thank you.
I have an extra air conditioner with a pretty good power cord like line, like, you know, length on that. I could bring that down in July at some point if you need it.
I would not hate that. I'll let you know, man. We're like looking at like maybe we can talk to an electrician to get like the power cord lengthened or something. I don't know.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah. We spent a lot of money in this air conditioner. We have no idea how to return it, right? Because the box that came in was like destroyed.
Right.
So, and it's huge, right? So, yeah, I don't know.
Between the last couple moves, when I moved out with from the ex, and then the my last apartment, I just keep acquiring air conditioners somehow. Like, I think I have 3 of them, including one gigantic, like one that just like sits in your room, and then has the exhaust to like go to the window.
Right.
Which
is
like a
hose.
Yeah, it's a fantastic one. I think I got it off of Woot a couple of years ago. So like I've just acquired them over the years, and they just sit in my garage, waiting to be, you know, used to mock Arif.
Great. Yeah, I'm so happy for you.
Good. We'll talk after the show about how we can make Arif not want to die in his new apartment. So, welcome to this week's show. We've got plenty of stuff to go over. First things first, we do want to thank you guys so much for listening. And if you would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of 2 different ways. You can go to patreon.com/Norse Code. And that's more of a subscription-based program. You can give like $1 a month, $2, untold amounts of money. You can also go to paypal.me/Norse Code and donate there. We have noticed that the name on that account is still Dusty. Do not worry. We will make sure that no dime from that goes to Dusty. Dusty will be getting no dimes from us. I joke, I talked to him earlier today, but the name, in order to change a name on a PayPal account is a annoying, ridiculous process.
It's awful.
Yeah, you need far more paperwork than we are willing to, let's just say, work toward doing. So at the moment, it still says Dusty O'Connell on it, but it will get to us, we promise you. We do have a new donor this week. This is from Derek McKenzie. Thanks so much, Derek. We do appreciate it. If you would like to just help out the show in other ways, you can listen to the show. You can you can help subscribe to us on iTunes. You can subscribe on YouTube as well. We go to YouTube. We also are going through Spotify, Stitcher, all sorts of different ways. Just spread the word about Norse Code. We also have a Facebook page as well where we post a new episode. So anything you guys can do to help out, we do appreciate. The drought of shows appears to be over. We will be putting out more content over the summer now because the most boring parts of the off-season are now finished. So we should be able to be putting out more in the way of episodes. Also, I put something out on Twitter a week or 2 ago, and we're still looking for suggestions. We would like to do a live taping during training camp, so that we can talk about the events of the day. We can talk about Vikings news. We can also do a bit of a Q&A as well for the show, and we would also tape it and then put it out as an episode. So we are looking for suggestions for live show locations during training camp. If you own a bar, or if you are friends with a manager of a bar in the Twin Cities area, we would like to hear from you. If you have any suggestions as to what would be a cool place to do it, we'd like to get a couple people on as special guests. Eric still owes us from the London episode, so we want to bring a couple people on anyway. Yeah, I was thinking about this before the show. You know what would be a really cool place to do it? Would be like outdoors at like Psycho Susie's. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we'd be able to pull that off. Like, I don't know what like people pay to like do events out there or anything, but
that sounds insanely fun.
That would be like awesome. Like I've been a fan of Psycho Susie's since like before I left Minneapolis years ago. So like I would totally be down to do that. That might be something I have to like look into after the show, but we are looking for suggestions for the live show, and we will have more information about that once we kind of figure out days and all that. So I imagine it would end up being in early August, but we don't have anything set in stone yet. So all of this aside, we have some news about Danielle Hunter. Danielle Hunter signs a 5-year, $72 million extension, $40 million in guarantees, and a $15 million signing bonus. He was extended way before Diggs is being talked about for an extension. Smart move, smart money. What do we got?
Yeah, I think on the Vikings side, this is a really good move. I'm doing work kind of compiling a bunch of research, what players are kind of on the path that Danielle Hunter is on. Given how much percentage of the cap he takes up, what does he have to accomplish in order to meet the expectations of a contract that size? How does he compare to other sort of third-year players, and where do their contracts go and stuff like that? He comes out ahead in a lot of these categories. One of the categories that I'm sure has been quote-unquote invented a couple of times, maybe dozens of times, but I hadn't seen, was something I just called disruptions, which were stops, which are tackles that are essentially for very little gain or for loss, constituted as a loss for the offense in the running game. Sacks, obviously, in the passing game, and batted passes at the line of scrimmage. So anything that killed a play dead and the offense didn't want to accomplish what they did. So I just called that disruptions. And I looked at disruptions per game, and I looked at sort of which players were kind of in Danielle Hunter's kind of cohort, as it were. People who took the same number of snaps over 3 years, people who, got a decent amount of sacks and stuff like that. And I think since 2006, in the first 3 years, Hunter ranks third or fourth in disruptions per game over the first 3 years, which is not just very good. I think it's great considering that he was playing kind of a substitute role for that first year. It was kind of rotated a lot in that second year, despite being named a starter. So there's a lot there to like. But from the perspective of the contract, so the player obviously good, and we expect a lot more from him. From the perspective of the contract, it's really fantastic stuff. The first 2.5, functionally 3 years, are guaranteed for the Vikings, for Danielle Hunter, which means the Vikings aren't tied to the contract if he underperforms for 2 years or anything like that. But there's a couple of other years of extra stuff in there for negotiating terms for an additional extension if he needs it. But beyond that, Hunter gets a bunch of take-home pay, $15 million signing bonus, like you said, and probably a good chunk as a guaranteed roster bonus or a guaranteed salary at the beginning of the season. So from the Vikings perspective, I think it's pretty good. If you take a look at it, you adjust it for the cap environment that every signing comes in, and you just compare him to other edge rushers. His new extension among veteran edge rushers who have been on a second or a third contract ranks something like 15th or 16th. I tweeted it out not too long ago. It's 8.1%. I've got it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 or 14. 8.1% of the cap. That's Ryan Kerrigan territory, Cameron Jordan territory. It's about half a percentage below Everson Griffin. And for a 23-year-old on a 5-year contract, I think that's just tremendous value for the Vikings. I'm kind of surprised the incentives are really low. He's got incentives to earn, I think, up to $78 million. And I imagine those are contingent upon things like all-pro appearances, sack totals, and stuff like that. Stuff that, you probably, wouldn't consistently get over the course of all 5 years. And an all-pro pass rusher is worth quite a lot. I mean, we know what Von Miller's contract is, Justin Houston's contract, et cetera. But the fact that his contract doesn't escalate into anything very massive is really surprising to me. And it gives the Vikings a lot of cost control. So yeah, it's a really good deal. They saved probably $3 million a year more than if they had waited a year to do this. And I know that Jason Fitzgerald over the cap was estimating he could even approach $18 million, which I think is at the very high end. But the Vikings saved a lot of money by doing this early, and that gives them the room to approach someone like Anthony Barr, Stephon Diggs, because those two contracts are probably going to be the most difficult to nail down. They've finally gotten Eric Kendricks, Danielle Hunter down. They've activated Trey Waynes' fifth-year option, so he's on for another year. So to wrap up the 2019 draft class, there's only 2 more players, and those players are probably the most difficult to figure out.
So the no escalator is kind of it just seems odd the way that it's the way that it's structured. It's really pro Vikings on that.
Yeah, I think so, and I'm kind of surprised that the escalators don't get larger. I mean, you can take a look at other people who signed contracts recently: Melvin Ingram, nbsp Pro, Calais Campbell. I think all of them do have larger escalators. They also all have a slightly more percentage of the cap. And so, yeah, if they hit like all pro thresholds or sack thresholds, their bonus jumps up. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if he had signed for a Chandler Jones kind of deal, which is 16.5, almost 10% of the cap. And I'm surprised the escalators don't bring it up to that either. So yeah, I'm a little surprised. It sounds like Hunter just wanted to get a deal done and stay with the Vikings, which it's great for the Vikings.
It's great
probably speaks to the team culture.
Yeah, it's great for the Vikings, and it kind of shows a couple things that, you know, he recognizes that this is likely going to be the best defense in the league. So, and a team that is being favored to make a playoff run. So it's not like this one of those situations where, you know, the Vikings would be considered like one of the, like, I guess, basement dwellers or something like that. And it's like, well, I'm not going to, if that were the case, he wouldn't take a bit of a discount to stay. Here he's just like, no, let's just get this over with a year before we want to do that. Like, let's keep me around for a while because this defense has legs.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also the individual coaching talent of Andre Patterson, the defensive line coach, I bet that also played a role. I mean, there's a good case to be made that Patterson is the best defensive line coach in the NFL, and maybe you just kind of want to stay closer to the people that made you good in the first place, so you don't have to worry about whether or not you'll be able to fit in another location, get cut early or something like that. So there's a lot of reasons that Hunter might want to have taken a significantly smaller deal to stay in Minnesota. Or maybe, you know, everybody's wrong. Maybe his market actually wasn't that good, which I would find surprising. But whatever the case may be, it certainly worked out for the Vikings.
No, absolutely. And there's certainly enough teams out there that are looking for, that would be looking for a player like Danielle Hunter. I think a market would exist. Especially in a place like the AFC South where the quarterback play tends to be a bit more subpar. Like, this would be a place where he would be like an important part of a team. But the Vikings have him for a 5-year extension. That's good. Like, this defense is pretty much signed through. Like, the Barr deal is like the one thing that is kind of the cloud over this defense right now. Like, the potential Barr deal.
Right, and when you think about it in terms of other, you know, great defenses around the league, the Vikings have had the lowest roster turnover among defenses over the past couple of years.
Like, even really Vikings, like, even as far as Vikings go, like, it seems like no one's really leaving this from last year.
Yeah, no, it's pretty shocking to be able to have the same starters, not just from last year, but the year before. The same 11. Well, I guess with Sheldon Richardson starting instead of Tom Johnson, so I guess 10 of the 11. But yeah, there's very few people leaving, and even in the case where, you know, the Vikings don't have the ability to keep Anthony Barr for whatever reason, it still would remain one of the most consistent defenses from year to year to year in the NFL, just because they've been able to hold on to their core for so long. So if you lose a player here or there, you lose Andrew Sandeo, Anthony Barr. You still have the essential elements that made the defense so good last year.
Good for Danielle Hunter, and definitely good for the Vikings. This defense is looking great, and I guess the elephant in the room then becomes, what are we doing with Stephon Diggs, a receiver that, while not the most healthy of wide receivers, is still playing at a pretty high level.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. Like I said, it just feels like that deal will be a little bit tougher to get done. I think Diggs might demand a little bit more, might demand something closer to his worth. I think Hunter kind of let himself underplay his negotiating position, and you can't really expect that from most players. And I think Stephon Diggs is, you know, another one of those players, and he remains pretty critical in the sense that there's no receiver depth. I mean, you've got Adam Thielen, and then what do you have? Laquan Treadwell, Kendall Wright, you know, whatever, right? And so the Vikings probably value him a lot, and it's hard to find someone right away, but I wouldn't be surprised if if the price gets too high, the Vikings just walking away and signing a receiver in free agency, because receivers are a little bit easier to find than some other positions. So that might be part of it. That Diggs, in attempting to kind of figure out what his true value is, might price himself out of the Vikings. And that's not to like be a scaremonger or anything. I just have no idea what's going to happen or why specifically the specific deal hasn't gotten done yet. I wouldn't be surprised if he demanded something like $15 million. He plays like one of the best receivers in the league. I personally think he's a better receiver than Adam Thielen, and Adam Thielen's already massively underpaid. The Vikings currently have something like $12 million in cap space, but they'll have a lot more next year, depending on kind of what they do with Sheldon Richardson, and obviously, as the cap increases. So it's going to be kind of difficult to figure out. That 3 technique position is going to be in need as well as that wide receiver position. So they might choose to, resolve one of those in the draft and one of those in free agency, or they might, keep Stephon Diggs and let, Sheldon Richardson go and find a different kind of solution to that problem. But yeah, that's kind of like the only sticking point, I think, for me, is because, Diggs has been such an essential element to the way that offense worked last year and has been such an excellent receiver for the Vikings that it would be very difficult to lose him just because there's just not much behind him.
Do you think that, on the whole, defensive players tend to undervalue themselves more than like wide receivers or offensive players?
No, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think this is kind of specific to Danielle Hunter, and there's even a worry that Anthony Barr might be overvaluing himself because he's got pass rush skills that weren't necessarily used all that much last year, and he may want to get paid closer to what pass rushers get paid as opposed to what linebackers get paid, which can be an enormous difference, right? Like some linebackers get paid. Some top linebackers get paid $8 million, and Von Miller, gets paid $19 million, right? So the difference can be like twice your salary. So I wouldn't be surprised if he overvalues kind of what his market is going to be. But yeah, I would say that's probably not the case. I wouldn't be surprised if wide receivers uniquely overvalued themselves just because of the personality types associated with wide receivers.
When you think of wide receivers demanding or trying to get more money for things, you start thinking of like, I like how the first name that comes to my head is like Terrell Owens or something like that, or Des Bryant trying to get like a bigger deal, trying to get a bigger deal. But yeah, personality type, you would think that they would be less likely to take like a hometown discount.
Yeah, I think maybe for receivers it's the case. I think, for someone like a tight end or an offensive lineman or a quarterback, I don't think there's a ton of evidence of that. But for wide receivers, that feels true. So let's just say it is.
We can just go with that. Who needs facts or, actual statistics to back something up?
Right.
Hercules has been put onto IR. Wasn't formally like released. He was just put on IR. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, the IR process in the offseason involves, putting someone through waivers with an injury designation.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So, like 99.9% of the time, they end up on injured reserve for their original team. But occasionally, the Patriots will snipe a guy and put him on the roster, even though he's injured.
They just want something to add on to the injury report, even though Tom Brady hurt his hand like 6 years ago. He's just always listed as questionable for it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but we ended up signing Mike Needham, which we don't know a ton about. I've watched him a little bit play in the Big Sky Conference. He's actually, I believe he was a 3-year All-Pro for the Big Sky Conference. He would play against the University of North Dakota, quote, Fighting Hawks. Although I don't know if they were Fighting Hawks when he was playing them, but he did have an interesting game in 2016. But what do we know about Mike Needham?
So I have to admit I haven't watched a ton of him either, but from what I can gather from other people that seem to know who he is, his scouting report is like kind of your generic undersized linebacker. He is supposed to have great pursuit speed, and to pair with that, he's also got, according to one of the guys that I looked up, phenomenal like instincts, not just like good instincts, but like remarkably good instincts, which, that's good, right? That sounds good. But he's 224 pounds, and just like most linebackers at that size, unless you're someone like Telvin Smith, he gets blown off of blocks easily. So I would imagine that he's kind of a special team signing, to kind of, the Vikings have always kind of had a 225-pound special teamer. He ran a 4.6 40, which is just kind of where it's a faster than average linebacker. And so that's kind of perfect for special teams where you want like a 220-pound guy running a 4.55 or something like that. He's pretty close to that. His agility scores aren't like impressive or anything, but they're also not like Casey Matthews bad or anything. So, he's got some tools, and it seems like his frame is probably, based on what I'm reading, is probably not, fit to make him a bigger linebacker to be able to finally take on those blocks. But yeah, undersized athletic linebacker who has trouble getting off of blocks, and he's supposed to have good instincts too to boot. So I guess a good addition. I mean, the Vikings have significant linebacker depth issues, so adding another linebacker to the mix makes sense to me.
Yeah, not a bad idea. Let's also go to let's talk about a little bit about the rookie camp going on. What's been going on down in Egan this year?
We saw some roster designation changes at the conclusion of OTAs. Tom Compton's been moved from offensive guard to offensive tackle, which I imagine they're just still going to try, positions out. With Elflin's injury throughout most of OTAs, we didn't get to see what the offensive line should look like. For the most part, we didn't see draft pick Brian O'Neill in the starting rotation, which makes sense. It's fine because that's kind of what we all expected as a developmental guy. So we've seen a lot of snaps with Rashad Hill at tackle. We've seen a couple of snaps with Tom Compton at left guard or at right guard. We've seen a bunch of snaps with Mike Remmers at guard, and I think they're still figuring out that offensive line and what it's going to end up looking like at the end of the season or at the end of the preseason. But for the most part, that's what it looks like. We saw Mike Hughes get a lot of play in the nickel. And Zimmer has kept him in the nickel. He mentioned that Hughes, for example, has picked up the defense faster than defensive backs typically do. He was pleasantly surprised by it. If you recall, when Trey Waynes was put in the nickel, Mike Zimmer kind of later called it a mistake. He likes putting defensive backs in the nickel because it exposes them to a different view of the defense, and it's kind of just a more difficult assignment to learn, so that when you go back to whatever your natural position is, if it's not the nickel, you'll have a greater understanding of what everyone's assignments and roles are, which allows you to play your position better because you know where everyone needs to be. And also doing something difficult will make a difficult thing easier. So there's a couple of reasons to do that, but he's keeping Mike Hughes in the nickel because he's very impressed with kind of the mental acumen with which he's been able to pick up the defense. The same thing kind of happened for him at Central Florida, where he arrived 2 weeks before the season started and took the starting job in week 2, I think, and ended up playing well enough to be a first-round pick. A similar thing happened when he was at North Carolina and when he was at a community college. So that's all pretty consistent. He should challenge Mackenzie Alexander for the starting nickel spot. For now, it looks like Mac is taking those first team nickel reps. I wrote a piece about what it would take for Mac to kind of justify a spot as a starter in the nickel. I mean, we've seen, Vikings defensive backs struggle early initially. We saw Trey Waynes do that. We saw Xavier Rhodes do that. Even veterans, Captain Munnerlyn, when he was initially signed to the Vikings in 2014, I think, struggled in his first year too. So after 2 years of struggling, I guess, for Mac, we'll see if he can hold off a challenge for Mike Hughes, who I think is playing a lot better than Zimmer kind of anticipated. So a lot of interesting storylines to come from camp. There's the, receivers that everyone kind of just falls in love with. Brandon Zylstra, a CFL superstar, I guess, popped up in camp and, it's kind of maybe a long shot to earn a Mr. Mankato award, even though it's in Egan. We haven't seen a ton from a lot of people just because there's no pads on or anything. But yeah, those are kind of the things kind of floating around over the past couple of weeks.
Cool. So the next thing that we want to start doing is taking a look at the other teams in our division. We're going to start with the Packers. We'll go on to the Bears and the Lions after this. But I also wanted to bring this up because I posted something on Twitter about 2 weeks ago and got a whole bunch of messages from Packers fans declaring that the Packers had the, quote, best offseason in the league. One person said even in the history of the league. So I guess my first question, I know. So my first question is, did the Packers have the best offseason in the league this year? And second off, what has changed for them other than picking up a tight end?
So, like, obviously the Rams had the best offseason last year. Like, it's not even close. Like, what? So what?
Yeah, listen, I wanted to start replying to them, but I know that if you, like, give them oxygen, it's only going to make them worse. So, like, I just sat back for a second, like, I'll wait until I'm in front of a literal microphone before we tackle this. So, yeah, the Rams had the best offseason, and I don't think it's a question, but what's changed?
Well, let's talk about the Packers. So someone called in to the other podcast yesterday and asked me, like, so what's the ceiling for the Packers? The ceiling is obviously winning the Super Bowl. They've got a bunch of talent. His name is Aaron Rodgers. And they acquire 2 first-round corners that I like a lot. You know, if that defense, kind of resembles the 2010 defense or even kind of outperforms it, they're in a really good position. And their best offseason move was not former All-Pro Muhammad Wilkerson or former Pro Bowler Jimmy Graham. It was probably Mike Pettin because they've always kind of had talent on that defense, but they've never been able to put it together under Dom Capers. Mike Pettin's never had a defense as a defensive coordinator, has never had a defense below the top 10. He helped orchestrate some really stellar Bills defenses and some really historically stellar Jets defenses. And so he gets to reunite with Muhammad Wilkerson and kind of create and craft that defense that has, Mike Neal and Nick Perry and I guess Clay Matthews if he still has any gas left. And he gets to, infuse the secondary with the talents of Josh Jackson and the Louisville cornerback that I liked a lot. Jair Alexander, and maybe he gets to revive the career of HaHa Clinton Dix, who had a phenomenally bad year despite having a really good debut.
Did you see he was ranked 100 or 99 in the top 100 for the NFL?
Well, like really? This year?
Like he was listed in the in that top list that we made fun of.
Wow, they only put like 6 safeties on there. What a waste. Okay, yeah,
I'm pulling it up. I'm actually pulling it up right now just to make sure I don't have to cut this. But I was going to say, I believe it's 100 through. Yeah, he was literally named. He was number 100. HaHa Clinton Dix, safety.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on that list are already kind of in the ether, so I'll just let them lie.
If you'd like more on that, check out our previous episode, The Hater 100.
Yeah, right. So they reacquired Tramon Williams, they acquired Jimmy Graham, they got Muhammad Wilkerson, they traded away Demarius Randall to get Deshaun Kaiser, which maybe he's the QB of the future. I feel like they don't make that trade unless they've got some doubts about Brett Hundley. They definitely have doubts about Brett Hundley. There's no question about that.
Do they have these doubts from watching his play last year?
Yeah, right. Like, why? Why would that be?
I don't know. I watched many a Packers game last year where he just came out onto the field and sadness happened for them. So, I hear from scouts that that's the opposite you want to have happen for your team. Is when you come out of the tunnel and just sadness starts happening.
Yeah, it's not ideal. So, in terms of the acquisitions, I think the names are better than the recent history of play. Tramon Williams was playing at a Pro Bowl level years ago, and the fact that he's come back to probably not do that again is nice, I guess. The real questions are kind of what level of play that you'll get from Jimmy Graham or from Muhammad Wilkerson. Graham benefited from a ton of red zone targets and a little bit of luck in Seattle to produce a bunch of touchdowns, not that many yards. And it remains to be seen if he can access what he had with New Orleans to be kind of a leading tight end, but it seems like a lot of people are pessimistic about that. And I'm kind of, I wouldn't say I think that he's going to like suck and get below 200 yards and then get a bunch of red zone targets and inflate his value. I think he'll probably play statistically better than he did in Seattle. But I don't think he's going to be like a savior. The fact that Devontae Adams finally turned it around is more important to the health of the receiving core than Jimmy Graham. So, you know, that's a positive. I mean, they lost Richard Rodgers, which is not a huge loss anyway. They have a tight end. They've been talking about getting a tight end ever since Jermichael Finley. I think, was he forced to retire because of the neck thing? They just haven't had a tight end since then. Muhammad Wilkerson hasn't played well. I expect him to get back up to form, not just because of his relationship with Mike Pettin. It just seemed like part of the reason he was playing poorly is because he just hated the Jets. Which, yeah, sure, fine.
That is a legit reason to play poorly.
Yeah. So, as long as he like doesn't miss meetings anymore or fall asleep in them.
Yeah, there is that.
I think the Packers will probably feature him, and that'll create a fairly dangerous defensive line. So their offseason was fine. They added a guy who I'm optimistic about, a guy that I am cautiously optimistic about. And I guess that's like the best offseason in the history of the league. I feel like the best offseason in the history of the league, if it were a Packers offseason, has to be the one where Reggie White sued the NFL and got to sign with the Packers. Like that has to be it, right?
That leads to a Super Bowl. So I feel like it has to.
Right? But no, I mean, getting a washed up Jimmy Graham and a washed up Muhammad Wilkerson, that's like the same thing. So
pretty much anyway. Isn't there a like time frame? Running backs have the year 30 as the time that elite running backs start to go downhill. Is there a time that tight ends tend to like start to go off a cliff?
As far as I know, no. We don't have a ton of good evidence, just because there just haven't been that many useful test cases for tight ends. The ones that we remember that do well are players that like played forever. Antonio Gates, Jason Witten, Tony Gonzalez.
But a lot of that turns into like injury luck, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's a survival bias here that wouldn't give us a lot of clues as to like Jimmy Graham specifically, right? So yeah, I don't know what exactly the age would be for that. I suppose if we were to condense the Packers offseason into just the draft, I guess I get it. They got like a free first round pick for like nothing because the Saints are idiots. And they still got who they wanted. They got two really good cornerbacks. I guess Kevin King's going to come back, so there's a bunch of talent in the secondary that'll probably be an immediate upgrade, even though it's going to be rough in the beginning. So, I mean, you could say they had like an astounding first 2 days of the draft. They re-signed Devon House, I guess, but like best in the history that. Come on.
I know. I'm scrolling through my mentions trying to find the one comment about this because it was just so bad. I was like, I don't understand how you could possibly think that. But okay. Good for you.
Right. So yeah, the secondary is massively improved. I think they'll see an uptick in the performance of their defensive line. They've got linebackers. Blake Martinez is kind of underrated, but at the same time, like there's a reason. Like he's not stellar. He's like good. So it's fine, I guess. I found an NFL offseason grades for all 32 teams from NFL Executives piece written by Mike Sando, who does a lot of these. He pulls NFL executives sorts of pieces, either to rank the quarterbacks or to rank, triplets, right? Like, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, or whatever. But in this case, the executives graded the Packers offseason, and they gave it a C+. So, cool. I mean, that seems right? Like
it seems appropriate. I mean, considering what they've gained and the fact that they're going to try to keep Brett Hundley as far away from a football as humanly possible. Yeah, it seems about right.
Yeah.
That's a clear case of addition through subtraction.
Yeah, I mean, losing Demarius Randall, great. Not being forced to play Quentin Rollins, great. Not playing Brett Hundley, great. All good moves.
These are positive steps. Good for you.
So yeah, I mean, obviously the Packers will be a lot better this year than they were last year because they lost Aaron Rodgers fairly early in the season due to a completely unintentional accident that just happens in the game of football sometimes.
Well, just as long as you're talking, just make sure to drive this point home.
With like a shoulder or
just really dig in there. Make it so the listener is not prepared for what's about to hit them. And can complain about it for like
into a bar.
Yeah, exactly. They can complain about it for like 6 months.
But yeah, they'll obviously be better. Aaron Rodgers will be back, so that's a big part of it. Jordy Nelson was aging; they got rid of him. The Raiders picked him up. Fine, great. Those are like improvements, but nothing seems to be sort of an explosive improvement, which is like. You can win the Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers and an improved defense. I just said that, but I don't think it would be because of like how great the acquisitions were. They're not going to realize the gains of that first round pick until next year anyway. Which, God damn it, I hate the Saints. I can't believe they did that for like Marcus Davenport.
They wanted him. They wanted him bad.
Like if it was like Lamar Jackson, I'd be like, well, I get it. You overpaid, but okay, I get it. But like, really? Okay, fine. Whatever. I'm done being angry about that. I've never been angry. I'm not mad.
We've always been at war with East Asia. What are you talking about?
So yeah, in average-ish offseason, right? Because one thing to keep in mind about offseason is that every team improves. Like, and we tend to look at all of these moves in optimistic lights.
Yeah, every team improves as long as no one starts getting suspended.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Looking at you, Bucks.
Yep. So yeah, like, did they improve more than other teams? No. Did they improve more than the other teams in the division? Also, no. So, yeah. By
the way, did you get a chance to read the quote unquote apology from Jameis Winston today?
Oh God!
So
the nice thing in the apology is that in a circuitous way he admits that he did something.
Yeah,
not it.
I read it. I read it through 4 times. Like, and I'm a Florida State fan as far as football is concerned, and I watched him win the championship. Was a bit of a Jameis fan for a while, and then he just kept having problems. Like, yeah, you go do you, buddy. Like, I'm kind of out on this. And I read through his statement 4 times, and I still can't figure out what he's apologizing for. But he did something.
Right, like he definitely put the Uber driver. I think it was I apologize for putting the Uber driver in this position, and it's of complaining about sexual assault, like that position, like that one.
Because this is the 3rd girl, just saying.
But yeah, so that apology was awful, and then he just links it to drinking, which is not the way. Don't do that. It's not. I mean, everyone should know this metric. I feel I hear this all the time, right? That drinking doesn't make you a worse person; it makes you a less impulsive, more authentic person, right? And if that person is a worse person, I mean, that's kind of who you are. So. It's weird that he's yeah, I shouldn't have been drinking. You shouldn't have been groping. That's what it sounds like.
You shouldn't have been groping and drinking too, as it turns out. Well, we don't know that because the NFL has that nice little non-disclosure on that, so we can't actually talk about.
Right. Yes, the deal was essentially accept the
Yeah.
the 3 games, and no one has to see any evidence about or any testimony about what happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Good job, NFL.
So when the XFL does start a thing, can we can that be our off-season shows of just going over XFL stuff? I'm just until they have some big stupid Darren Sharper situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good deal, because apparently they're going to be the white bread of even if you fall asleep during a meeting, you're gone. No felonies, no nothing. So
I love that this is it's the same brand as the in your face or super rude, awful XFL. Discipline is
cameras in the cheerleaders' locker rooms.
Yeah, right, exactly. God, that skit is so cringy. Watched it the other day, and it was just oh, well, obviously they're never going to actually go into the locker room. That would ruin the joke. Great. It's a wrestling promo. I've seen wrestling promos dozens of times. So, great.
And then they did, yeah. Yeah, I like the branding on that. You would think you'd be trying for a different brand at that point, but nope, going straight after the same one.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's that tweet? Old XFL, we're not your dad's XFL. New XFL, we've targeted your dad with laser-like precision.
Exactly. All right, let's hit the mailbag. And Tommy Gunn asks, "How's Teddy Lowe?" God.
Great, apparently.
Yeah.
Who knows if it's trade fodder? But he could start, according to people.
People who are paid to watch Jets off-season stuff. We are not paid to do that. I don't know the amount of money that it would take to pay us to watch Jets off-season stuff, but we're not at that point yet.
Right.
Nor is our soul ready to be taxed in such a way. Delta BC Dad asks, regarding Anthony Barr, is it possible his lack of motor in 2016 was due to an injury, and his taking responsibility for his lack of effort in the press is a combination of humility/youth/ not wanting to argue with your coach in public? It's certainly not the first time Zimmer has called someone out for lack of effort, and if they were injured. If Barr were injured and he argued in the press with his coach, he could have been called out for that bad attitude. What do you think? Do you think this 2016 was due to injury or trying to save face and just gotta squash it in front of the press?
I certainly think that's a reasonable supposition. He did get his hand hurt early in the season, and it seemed to affect him. But a lot of the stuff that he was bad at had very little to do with the kind of things you would ask your wrist to do in football situations. So dropping to the wrong spot in coverage has very little to do with the fact that your wrist hurts, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if some of his drop off, missed tackles, for example, had a little bit to do with the injury and maybe some other factors that we're not aware of that aren't necessarily effort related. The reason I laughed when this came up, and I don't know if Delta BC Dad, when he asked this question, had heard the hour 2 of the Football Machine podcast that I was on yesterday. I assume he did, but I got into an argument with somebody about Anthony Barr and Trey Waynes, as I want to do. As a caller, he called in and he talked about how Anthony Barr has consistently demonstrated a lack of motor and a lack of effort, and that's not worth rewarding with a contract. And we argued about it, and it turns out the guy was interpreting a statement from 2 separate points in time as regarding an amount of effort at those 2 different points in time, as opposed to both talking about the 2016 season. So Zimmer said in December of 2016 that Anthony Barr was coasting. In the offseason of 2017, Anthony Barr admits that he didn't try very hard. And so part of the argument that we were having, and the guy ended up admitting it later on Twitter, was whether or not this occurred over the course of multiple seasons and he's a persistent, low motor guy, or if it was just one season, and having 3 of 4 seasons be high effort, high quality seasons is probably a more reliable gauge of who he is. But yeah, I would say that I wouldn't be surprised that, given how good the 2015 season was for Anthony Barr, he was playing at essentially an all-pro level. Given how good that 2015 season was, I wouldn't be surprised if his approach to the 2016 offseason was maybe not as sharp going in, which is essentially what he said. But I also would be shocked if he had completely decided to like rest on his laurels or something. So I imagine there's a multitude of factors. And when people, so one of the things that like kind of bothers me is that when players make statements about their play or what their goals are, people interpret those statements as if they're not players, as if they're just people with better information about the situation. And you need to think about it a lot like a player. Like, it is very important for a lot of NFL players to feel in control. And so if they can blame the 2016 season, if Anthony Barr can blame the 2016 season on factors that are entirely inside of his control and identify areas to work on and improve, that makes him a better player, whether or not that's true, right? Quarterbacks should judge themselves by wins. We should not judge quarterbacks by wins, right? Because it gives quarterbacks the goal that they should be working towards, and it forces them to improve their game in ways consistent with winning, as opposed to improving like their passer rating or something by throwing a bunch of 0-yard passes, right? Like no one wants that. And a quarterback's goal should not be to improve their passer rating. And that's the only reason these measures work, to identify talent in the first place. So when we talk about like what players say, very often we just treat it as a person who has better information, as opposed to a player with a different set of motivations for saying the things that they say. One of those motivations could be to make sure that they don't disagree with their coach, but another could just be if you hold yourself accountable for something that's not entirely your fault, it still allows you to improve, right? So that's, I think, maybe just the best way to think about these things. And way too often, we take a player's explanation or description of an event and apply it, I think, uncritically.
So the next question that we have is also about Anthony Barr. Raul, via email, says Anthony Barr was mentioned on the NFL Network, or rather he mentioned on the NFL Network that he is rushing the passer more in the defensive line drills this offseason. Since he is so critical to the double-A gap blitz look, I have a hard time seeing him doing less of that. In what packages or situations do you see Barr rushing the passer on the defensive line?
I would imagine that a big part of this is just to find more looks along on those third down defenses. And, you know, in his rookie year, he did rush off the edge, not a fair amount, but a decent amount in third down situations, even though their primary third down defense was the double-A look. I've talked a lot in the offseason about how the double-A gap look has evolved. They've attacked the B gap. They've attacked the C gap. They've found different ways to use 9 people on the line of scrimmage to put pressure on the quarterback that look different from one another. And when you think about it like that, then it does make sense for him to continue practicing his pass rush skills so that they can increase the number of ways that they put pressure on the quarterback. The reason the double-A gap look is so effective is because it creates the threat of pressure that is essentially unblockable pressure, because the center can't block both linebackers and the guards are occupied with defensive tackles on either shoulder. So it's a deadly look because he has the ability to rush the passer. So you still want him to be an effective pass rusher. Him working with in defensive line drills with pass rushers should enable pressure looks from third down that are related to or look like the double-A look. So I don't think that this is detrimental, because I don't think it forces him to play defensive end or anything like that. I think it improves his pass rush skills from a variety of locations along the line of scrimmage. So I think it actually does make a lot of sense, especially given that the package has evolved and will continue to evolve under Mike Zimmer.
Nick Olson asks, what are the Bangladeshi Beefcake's thoughts on extending Trey Waynes versus Sheldon Richardson?
Well, I guess that's interesting, aside from the name in the question.
Aside from the fantastic name.
God, geez. Makes me want to work out. I guess that's not bad. Because I'm so undeserving of that nickname. Yeah, I would say... That's interesting. It really depends on what Sheldon Richardson does this year. What's really fascinating is that my conception about what matters on defense has shifted a lot this offseason, in a large part due to the work that Eric Eager has done with Pro Football Focus. And, a lot of people will hear that and they'll kind of turn off. And I totally understand that. Like, Pro Football Focus grades, especially for Vikings players, seem to be wonky, right? The way that they graded Xavier Rhodes, for example, is this last year has put a lot of people on edge and has kind of discredited their process the entire way. So I totally get why people roll their eyes. But what's important to understand is that the vast, vast, vast majority of the time, what they're doing carries merit, and maybe a different amount of merit for each position. I still think there's a problem with the way that they grade safeties and stuff like that. But it carries a lot of merit, and over thousands of snaps, you get a really good picture of what these players are. So they took these grades, and Eric is a professor of statistics. I watched his talk at Stevens Point. It's the reason I went to that analytics conference. And so it's more than just simple multiple linear regression. I mean, there's a lot of machine learning involved in what they did to try and identify which positions are important. And here's what's really cool about that project is that it allows them to project how a team will do despite like injury, for example. So if a left guard gets injured, right, like say Nick Easton gets injured, they can project the next game, take Nick Easton out of their model and insert, whoever the backup is, like maybe Danny Isidora, and they can simulate that game. And it allows them to calculate a wins above replacement for each player. It allows them to calculate positional value. And one of the things they found is that interior pass rush pressure is not as important as people like me thought it was. I thought it was even better than edge pressure, and the only reason edge defenders were paid more is because they get pressure more often, and it makes up for the fact that interior pressure is better. It turns out that edge pressure may be both more valuable and more fruitful. But the second thing is that cornerbacks are significantly more important to the success of a defensive unit than anything else, which is not to say pass rushers aren't important. They are. It's not to say interior defenders aren't important. They are. But cornerbacks seem to be the most important based off of their work. And that gets me to thinking how much more important, right? Because Sheldon Richardson has the capability of being a top 5-3 technique. Trey Waynes, I don't think has the capability of being a top 5 cornerback. Maybe a top 5 cornerback too, but I'm talking about cornerbacks because I don't think their analysis broke down cornerback 1 versus cornerback 2. So it depends on how much more important the cornerback position is supposed to be and how consistently either of them play, because both of them have reliability questions coming into the season. Sheldon Richardson, I don't think he necessarily had a down year, but he didn't have a productive stuffing stats year. And it certainly wasn't a year that reflects the best that he was able to do with the Jets. Trey Waynes, of course, had a phenomenal back end to the season, which kind of basically ended right before the playoffs, and then he just kind of was playing kind of poorly in the playoffs. But at the front half of the season, he was having a really poor time. It wasn't until the Cleveland game that we saw that he was playing kind of lights out of his mind, really, really good football. And so he's got his own reliability question. So I would just wait, right? And obviously you would wait on Sheldon Richardson. You sign him to a 1-year deal. It's not like you sign him to a 1-year deal and then extend him before he even plays a snap. And with Waynes, they activated a 5th-year option. So given that cornerbacks are more important, it makes me think this question is more interesting. But I still think it is likely that given the Vikings' options at cornerback, which now include Mike Hughes, and the options at 3 technique, which include nobody unless Jaleel Johnson steps up, it might actually make more sense to extend Sheldon Richardson than Trey Waynes, even though Waynes has been kind of the 5th player in the Fab 5 of the 2019 free agency class for the Vikings, as it were. So yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd still probably lean Sheldon Richardson despite all of that, but it's closer than I think we would have expected. This draft class coming up, by the way, for interior defenders is supposed to be one of the best. And one of the players in that draft class, Ed Oliver from Houston, is one of the best defensive players I've ever seen play. And I don't watch a ton of college football, so take that with a grain of salt. But also, I don't get caught up in hype cycles in the draft. I got caught up on Jadeveon Clowney, which has turned out whatever. But, I didn't get caught up on like Leonard Fournette or a bunch of other hype cycles in the preseason of the draft process. But I am so on board with Ed Oliver. And apparently there's two other interior defenders that will go that should go in the top of most draft classes, that will go behind him or maybe even in front of him in this class. And that should mean that there are talented interior defenders that, assuming that the Vikings need someone to fall because they like won the Super Bowl, that should fall to the Vikings. So that should inform our decision making here too.
I like how we're just figuring that in just in case.
Right. I mean, in case they win the Super Bowl, maybe it's harder to find a 3 technique. So that's a problem.
I think that's one of those good problems to have, as far as I can tell. But Nathan Holtz has a question that we've had on the show a couple times, but let's just condense it down to the very last sentence. Is there any reason to be confident in this O-line group?
No, but that's not a reason to be pessimistic.
I just like the noise that you made when I asked that question. It was like you were free falling there for a few seconds.
I've been answering offensive line like earlier today. I was on a radio show and they're like, "Yeah, so the Vikings offensive line got better, right?" And I was like, "It might have gotten worse."
Like, I don't know if we'd call it getting better, Bob.
Right? I was like, it's better than 2016 and 2015 and 2014. So in that sense, yeah, it's Lowe's better. Great. Fantastic.
Great,
I'm on board. But if you were concerned about the performance of the offensive line last year, and I think there was kind of reason to be concerned despite the fact that they only gave up 7 sacks because Keenum was only sacked on 2% of snaps that he was pressured on, which is just an insane rate. It implies a lot of pressure, right? I would imagine that Elflein gets better. I would imagine that Easton gets better. I don't have a ton of confidence in Easton, though. And I don't have a ton of confidence in right guard to be named. That just doesn't inspire me, I guess. And while I'm fine with Remmers at right tackle, and I expect Rashad Hill to improve, I am not sure about any of it. So I think confidence is maybe the wrong word about it because it implies a degree of certainty. I'm not certain about any of these things, right? Riley Arif should play better, and he was fine. Mike Remmers, when he's playing right tackle, is fine. Elflein should play better, and he probably outperformed his Pro Football Focus score, so that's great. But we don't know if Mike Remmers is going to play right tackle. We don't know kind of what's going on at the guard position, so... And Brian O'Neill seems to be very consistently playing second team as he's going to kind of wait before he sees the field, hopefully. So there's a bunch of reasons to be optimistic, but not a bunch of reasons to be sure in your optimism. So that's kind of what I would say. And to me, I am kind of a pessimistic person anyway. So that's the part of the Vikings that worry me the most, as it has for the past 10 years.
Do you remember a time when the Vikings offensive line wasn't a concern of yours?
Yeah, 2006.
Was that a time? Did that time really exist? Or are you just romanticizing a time when you first became a fan of the team?
Yeah, right, exactly. Are you talking about the time Bryant McKinney was too fat to play? Is that is that when you were excited? No? Oh, okay.
Was this before Culpepper got hurt?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so persistent worry about the Vikings offensive line, insert it here.
There we go. Let's go with this is actually a real interesting question from young Sheldon Richardson, who asks, is pass rusher the second most important position?
According to PFF, maybe not. Maybe it's cornerback. That's weird, but yeah, maybe. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around all this, but the theoretical evidence for why a pass rusher is more important is very strong, but it's theoretical. The fact that we have tested evidence now that kind of indicates that they're not is very interesting to me. And think about this, though. Like, I think the Vikings have believed this, at least in terms of investment, for a long time. They've gotten a lot of first and second round corners, and not just under Mike Zimmer, but especially under Mike Zimmer. They've got 3 first round cornerbacks on the roster and a second round cornerback. I forgot about Terrence Newman. So 4 first round cornerbacks on the roster. Their pass rushers they found in the 3rd or 4th round. Brian Robinson, 4th round. Everson Griffin, 3rd round. Danielle Hunter, 3rd round. Backup pass rushers, Tayshaun Bauer, undrafted. Stephen Weatherly, 7th round. So they've been getting these guys from the 3rd or 4th round for a while. So in terms of investment, like obviously in terms of pay, they end up by the time contracts roll around paying, defensive ends a fair amount, but not a ton, right? Because they didn't pay Everson that much. He's getting 14.5 and Danielle Hunter's getting 14.4. They're not paying them Von Miller money. Maybe pass rusher is not the second most important. And maybe the Vikings have thought that for like 5 years now.
It's entirely possible. Piggybacking off of that question, what is the least important position excluding special teams? Scooter on Twitter has asked that.
I would also exclude fullbacks. So probably tight end.
You just really want like every tight end that plays for the Vikings to just block you. Is that it?
Well, I mean, first of all, Rudolph didn't block me. He blocked everyone else.
Oh, he blocked Ted. That's right.
Yeah,
he blocked Ted.
Second, this has nothing to do with whether or not like the tight ends are talented. I mean, like they are, right? It's just like they get like so. The PFF has just wrote a piece. This actually has nothing to do with PFF, but the first piece of evidence I'm using is from them. But they didn't shape my opinion this time, unlike with the pass rusher cornerback question. But they just wrote a piece indicating that we can kind of figure out how effective it is to pass to the slot, how effective it is to the slot receiver, how effective it is to pass to the outside receiver, how effective it is to pass to a running back or a tight end. So the running back, passing to the running back is the least expected points added out of anything. And that makes sense, right? Running backs are not the primary read. And so running backs are outlet options. They're usually an alternative to getting sacked or getting picked, right? Or throwing the ball away. And when you think about it in terms of that, running backs that who can catch passes are great because you're turning -5 yards or maybe a turnover into 5 yards, right? So in terms of the options available at that decision point, that's great. So it's not saying that running backs who catch passes are not useful. It's saying that in terms of who we target, running backs are last. After that, I'm pretty sure it's tight ends, then slot receivers, then outside receivers. And so they don't do a lot in terms of, unless it's Rob Gronkowski, he's an exception. He's always an exception. But, they get 500 to 700 yards. They get a little more first downs per catch or first downs per target or first downs per route run than a lot of receivers do. And they do a little more in terms of touchdowns. But in terms of the points that they add as receivers, it's the lowest on the totem pole because they just get fewer yards per route run, and they do less to advance the ball in the field. Then you could say, well, they might make up for it as blockers. And the fact that the tight end position is becoming specialized into blocking tight end or receiving tight end kind of obviates that point. Like you wouldn't say, but Jimmy Graham is like, a 1,000-yard receiver who can block, right? Like literally no one would say that, like, because he can't. But, Rob Gronkowski can block, Travis Kelce can block, Greg Olsen can block, and they can do it generally pretty well. Olsen depends on the year. But, Vernon Davis was a really good blocker, for example. But their blocking is kind of the least important component to a running game, which is about a third as important as the passing game anyway, right? So it's probably the tight end is what I'm getting at, is that their blocking is not as meaningful as other blocking, and the receiving is not as meaningful as other receiving. They do have hidden value in the fact that it is difficult to guess what a team will do when they're on the field. That's the whole reason the 2 tight end set with the Murderer and Rob Gronkowski worked out so well. But for the most part, that deception is probably not worth it. So
you say that was his nickname. That was not his nickname when he played, just to be fair.
Yeah, I hope not. Otherwise, that's too on the nose. Like, he'd feel guilty afterwards, right? Like, oh, I should have known.
You would think. Luke Braun asks, which World Cup exit is more Vikingsy? The juggernaut Germans getting blown out by essentially the soccer Browns after a miracle, or Iceland whiffing on the gimme penalty kick against Nigeria? Now, I think the real way to determine this is which did you lose more money on?
Okay, so you brought this up when it was asked, and but I'll answer that in terms of between the two, but I'm also going to give you a third answer that is not my answer to the question, but an answer to the question of which I lost, what event did I lose the most money on? And it's the stupidest possible thing. Like, Arif, why would you have lost the most money on this inconsequential game that's hard to predict? Because I'm an idiot. That's the answer. It was Iran, Egypt, a game that I'm sure drew millions of bettors, more than, Germany and anyone else. Just a game everyone was super amped up for and excited for. And I had Iran winning, and if Iran advanced, I would move to the top 3 of my suicide pool. So I didn't bet directly on the game, so that's important. But the pool, we had like 40 players. It was like a decent buy-in, so there was a lot on the line. Iran and draws advance. That's the weirdest thing about this, but draws advance, right? So Iran goes up 1-0, or Egypt goes. I had money on Egypt. That's it. Egypt goes up 1-0. Great, fantastic. They're a better team. This all makes sense. Iran ties. Okay, fine. Egypt's a better team, so I shouldn't have to worry about this too much. 95th minute. The 5th minute of extra time, the arbitrary, ambiguous time that they just add because they've got a running clock and they have to stop play every so often for a foul or an offsides or whatever, an injury, right? That refs can basically end whenever they want. Ron scores the winning goal. So I lost a good chunk of from expected value into real value. $700, and that's after you divide it up. So that's the worst. That feels kind of Vikings. But I would have to, between the two events, Germany was just not good money, so I didn't put money on them actually. So it's Iceland. You idiots. You skullheads. And I mean, it's a missed penalty kick by guys who do the skull chant and call themselves the Vikings. I mean, yes, it's that one.
It's not even
against
a question at this
Eagles.
point. Aw.
Well, I'm just saying, the Nigeria Super Eagles. That's what they're called. Obviously, it's the Iceland one.
It would be hard to be more Vikingsy than that, I suppose.
Right? That's the most, it's not even Sweden. That's the most Vikings team going up against, the Eagles and missing a kick that's converted 78, 80% of the time.
Yeah.
Come on.
So Brian Dunkel asks, things are going too well as of late. So this begs the question, which Vikings rookie or recently re-signed veteran will put their foot through a glass door or have a body found in their basement? Who will get injured before the start of camp riding one of those mini motorcycles?
Man, it would have just been so easy to say Cordero Patterson on a hoverboard. But that can't happen, unfortunately.
No. Or it can happen, just it won't affect the Vikings nearly as much.
Right.
Let us be clear. We are not saying he can't get injured.
Right. That just seemed the most perfect. Aside from that,
who does
the Kirk Cousins seem kind of fake to you? Maybe he's hiding a body in his basement.
I don't know if he seems like he's hiding a body in his basement. Maybe in his van, but not in his basement.
Right. I'm just saying, he's so genuinely dorky. Maybe
that
it's
is a little odd. It'll take
weird.
a year. It'll take a year to kind of get used to it, but it seems a bit different. Looking between not knowing as much about Kirk Cousins and just looking at the difference between Kirk Cousins and Case Keenum, you would think that Case Keenum would probably be the bigger dork.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But no. It's definitely Kirk.
100% not the case. It's
so,
odd.
Good chance it's him.
Who does the car karaoke for the Vikings? Like, there's a video that gets posted every week or so. I'm trying to think if it's Brian Robinson or not. Oh, it's Chris Hockey. That's who's in it. Okay, never mind.
Doesn't count.
Darn shame. Like I had an actual idea there, but nope.
But who puts their foot through a door?
Who puts their foot through a door? Like,
should we keep it as a quarterback and say Kyle Sluter, or is there someone where
Kyle Sluter can do no wrong? As far as I can tell from Twitter, Kyle Sluter can do no wrong.
Right. So he's like the secret everyone's excited about him. Like, that's perfect, right?
It has to be then. It has to be that Kyle Sluter breaks his foot putting it through the glass because he was on his way to get onto one of those mini motorcycles.
Yeah. Boom. Done.
Sweet. We hit all three. Let's back up and get done then. Next question is from Don from Ohio. Speaking of people who are big fans of Kyle Sluter, should Warner Brothers sell the DC universe to Disney?
I assume he means like the Arrowverse, so that. Oh wait, yeah. No, I don't want Disney to control both comic universes.
I think the only reason why you would do something like that is to make Patton Oswalt's rant from Parks and Rec a thing.
Okay, now I got to include that in the show notes.
Like that's the only reason why you do this, is just to make it so that you have all possibilities. You have the X-wing come in for to fight Thanos, and then you have Superman and Spider-Man, and then Chewbacca on a little mechanical spider.
And then the whole time Mickey's just staring at everything in horror. I think it's probably better not to sell it to Disney, but to just hire Kevin Feige away or something. Just get someone competent at top to steer the direction of the movie universe. You don't have to sell it.
Just get Ron Howard to do it. What's the worst that could happen?
It could be bland and generic. Oh, that would be way better. Never mind.
Also from Don from Ohio, since Hunter took under market value, which of the two big potential free agents would take a team-friendly deal? So Diggs or Barr. We kind of covered this earlier, thinking that Barr would kind of be more likely to take that.
Maybe, because Diggs is a receiver, but if Barr considers himself as somebody who should get partial credit for being a pass rusher instead of a linebacker, and knowing that the difference between the two might be up to $10 million a year, it might actually be Diggs, despite the fact that we're Diggs is going to try and squeeze blood out of a stone and try to get all the amount of money that he it might still be Diggs, just because Barr might see himself as a multi-position guy that deserves to be paid between the two positions.
And he was certainly a higher, draft pick too, if they're going to be looking at something like that. But
right.
He also asks, what's the best carnival food you ever had, and carnival food you've never had but want to try?
The first time I tried a deep fried candy bar, I was in heaven. So that might be up there.
I think I had a bite of a deep fried Milky Way once, and that was a bit much.
You gotta be in the mood, is the thing. If you're slightly not in the mood, it's an awful experience.
No, you have to commit. You have to commit to that.
And I've had Oreo, Milky Way, and Snickers is by far the best. But yeah, so that's probably up there.
Well, it's already it's already being fried in peanut oil, so I imagine that the addition of extra peanut is just the cap on that.
Yeah, no, the thing I care about is definitely the synergy between the oil and the...
Well, no, I'm saying it's just...
just kidding.
Ass.
I'm trying to think of other carnival food. Like I've had gator and I've liked it. For the most part, it's been kind of tough. Sweet Martha's cookies are always up there.
Always. The gator tends to be a little tough. It's and especially the stuff at the state fair. It just a little bit more gamey than maybe you would have expected. But it's definitely more tough than I would like. It's one of those things where you have it like once, or you have it twice because you bring somebody to the fair.
Right. Yeah.
Let's go with a Minnesota staple of not necessarily a Minnesota State Fair food, but like an actual county fair food with ufta tacos. Do you remember ufta tacos when you were living up here, or did your parents not love you?
My parents may not have treated me to that. What's that?
The ufta taco is it's a wonder. It's like an Indian like fry bread, and then you have your run of the mill taco toppings of of the meat of the taco meat, and then lettuce, onions, tomatoes, stuff like that. And it's your basic walking taco, but it's the fry bread shell that really sells it, and is just fantastic. I'm a part of the there's where I work. There's a big thing every August, and they get all these food trucks together for the week. There's all sorts of events, and last year the ufta taco guy didn't show up, and there was just about a riot. Now, keep in mind, there's a bunch of really good food trucks that were down there, but ufta taco didn't make an appearance. And it was noticed, so I believe they have. Nothing riles up people like the lack of an ufta taco from your event. Make sure to book those ufta taco people. It's an odd thing, but I do enjoy the ufta. Let's take a little bit of a different spin on this. What's the worst carnival food you've ever had? Do you remember the worst, or the one that stopped you in your tracks?
The worst part about this question is I can remember where I was and what I did, but not what it was. Like, it was...
You remember the reaction.
Right. Like, it was near where they sold hot dish on a stick, which is actually kind of all right. But it wasn't hot dish on a stick. It was something else.
I was going to say, was it like the Scotch egg, or...
No, I mean, I'm fine with Scotch eggs. I mean, they tend to be a little bit too heavy, but whatever. It was, which I think is also near the bacon on a stick, which is good.
No,
but
no,
what, you don't like it?
No, the bacon on a stick. The bacon on a stick stopped me. It was the last night of the fair. Must have been 2009, probably. It was the last night of the fair, 2009 to 2010, probably 2009. And they were giving it away at the end. They had too much. So there was a guy literally just walking around giving out bacon on a stick for free. And it was all like sitting in the bacon grease still. Like there was a big pile of just liquid grease on it. And so the group of us all got it and then shook the bacon, so we got the grease on the ground just to try to make this somewhat more healthy.
Yeah, all right.
And all of us took our bites of it, and I'm a big guy, and I don't know if I finished the bacon. I think I had a couple of bites, and that's when the world slowed down. Every single one of us that had this, all just, you could watch us go in slow motion. And
was it old?
No, it was the grease. Our hearts were just going, yeah, you need to make some better life choices. And we made it to over to the nearest beer vendor, which I think was just a couple of feet, where the 50s diner thing. And each one of us got a beer and just sat for 20 minutes, drank our beer, and hoped that the beer would clear the blockage that we were putting in. The beer was acting as a stint.
Oh, I think the best beer I had there, I had immediately after I had the worst beer I had there. State Fair is like that.
Yeah, State Fair is definitely like that. Oh. Yeah, I remember that all too clearly. Kyle Slaby asks, my huntress of a wife has filled our chest freezer to the brim with venison. We have mostly ground meat, but we have some steak and roast as well. Both of us are on semi-diets, but not too calorie-strapped. What are some of the best ways to prep deer? Are you prepared for this? Because I actually did some research.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you were super gung-ho about this. For me, so one of the issues with game meat is, one, its gaminess, but two, they just tend to have a lot less fat, and so you have to find ways to cook it to temperature without it drying out. And so a lot of people suggest, roasting, the roast slow and slow for a while, which is like fine, except long cooking times tend to lead to drier meat. So you nearly always have to probably dry brine, but brine it in some way that'll allow you to keep the moisture in. And second, always have some sort of fat in contact with the food. But third, it might just be better to do a braise instead of a roast. And I know a lot of people just prefer roasts because you get the caramelization on the outside and you get to slice it at the table and stuff like that. Maybe you kind of do a half braise, half roast, where you turn the braising liquid into a gravy. But definitely you need to find a way to watch out for how dry and tough the meat can get. Make sure you get it up to at least 130. And probably for a little bit because, it's game meat. So it's a little bit more difficult to negotiate all the problems that could pop up. But I'd prefer either just steaks, like directly on a grill with a ton of fat, like an uncomfortable amount of fat.
An uncomfortable amount of fat, huh?
Yeah, right. Anti-Bangladeshi beefcake. Or just braising it. What's your take?
So I did some research, and I talked to a friend of the show. I say friend of the show. He's a listener. A guy by the name of Chris, who I actually used to live with years ago. He was the first person to actually to serve deer to me. So we talked for a little while, and this is what I got from him. He said venison roasts tend to get a little dry, so I'll either use a recipe with a juicy stock, or I'll just stake out the roast, marinate it, and then pan/fry grill it. But my favorite recipe is a can of cream of mushroom soup, half a can of water, half can of milk, an onion chopped, salt and pepper, all in a Dutch oven with pan-seared venison steaks for about an hour, and apparently makes a great gravy for the potatoes.
Oh wow!
So there's a whole process there. But as far as the ground meat is concerned, ground venison can be kind of hit or miss, depending on the gaminess, as you said. It's also ridiculously lean, so it doesn't patty up the greatest. So if you mix in a bit of 80-20 for ground beef, just for flavor, it'll also help it hold together, and then you can just use it like a hamburger. And if you do it right, you actually can't even tell the difference.
Yeah. I think also a lot of people, when they're cooking venison for the first time, are probably more likely to over-season than under-season. So obviously salt, pepper, that's fine. And like I said, you want to add fats of some sort. Maybe even just lard directly if you're going to do like a hamburger. But don't throw so many spices in there that you can't taste the meat. I think a lot of people end up doing that.
Yeah. You're not actually helping the gaminess situation at that point.
Right.
You're just making the food less edible. Next question. Would you consider putting together a 2019 daily calendar with all the best quotes from the show, out of context, of course, for a Kickstarter type event? Dear Lord, no.
Yeah, no, nope, sorry. It's way too much work. 5 people maybe want it.
It's and I think I briefly mentioned to you about the idea. I was like, well, nobody loves me more than me, and even I can't think of an audience for this sort of thing.
Right.
No, there is no possibility of that. But the next question is the best question of the mailbag, and it's addressed to me. It says, James, you find out Arif had killed someone and were given 2 options. Which would you choose? Neither option would bring legal punishment to you. Do you either A, turn Arif in and the podcast suffers? I think that's putting it mildly. Or B, pin it on Don from Ohio and deal emotionally with sending a mostly innocent man to jail. Don from Ohio also added that, not to mention that when he gets out, he would go full on Cape Fear. To me, which I was trying to figure out if it would just be like the movie Cape Fear or if it would be like the Simpsons episode Cape Fear, because at least by the end of it, I would have him singing, like in full regalia, singing the entire score from the HMS Pinafore.
Does Don from Ohio find out that? Cause I think that's an important element, right?
I think Don from Ohio obviously knows he didn't kill somebody in this particular instance.
Right, but does he find out that you're the one that framed and or that I'm the one that actually murdered this person?
I in this scenario, I like to think that somehow he figured out, or like I dropped some hint on the show or like the Christmas episode or something, that this might have like ended up being a thing, or we make a casual comment about how Don from Ohio is in jail or something, and we continually bring it up, or maybe I try to like express some form of remorse over it, or I just flat out tell Don from Ohio, you're just gonna have to do this for the good of the show.
He seems to be like pretty sure he gets out. Like, what if the murder I commit is just so gruesome that he gets life without parole?
People don't really escape from Ohio. Like,
there's also
in general.
That. Yeah, so yeah, you shouldn't have to worry about reprisal from him.
Let's take away the possibility of him coming back, and hiding under my car with a knife, or going to a movie that my son and I are attending and smoking a big cigar and laughing. Yeah, I think the phrase "the podcast suffers" is my favorite part of this whole thing, because that's assuming that people tune into the show for my Vikings takes.
I mean, maybe.
James goes solo for one episode. Viewership falls to nothing. No, that I don't think that would. I think you're underselling what the podcast suffers. Boy, do I pin it on Don from Ohio, or do I have a conscience? Oh, this is tough. Would Don from Ohio still have access to Twitter at this point?
In prison?
Yes.
No.
Boy, this is tough, but I think I would have to. I could go back to obscurity and hating the Vikings, in private, as opposed to putting it on iTunes. Do you put Arif in jail, or do you put Don from Ohio in for a crime he didn't commit? If the death penalty was involved, I don't think I could pin it on Don from Ohio. But I feel like
want me to die? I'm
just saying that would be like more like I don't want him to die. I feel like sending him to jail like for life would be different. But if like death is going to be involved, like state, like the state is going to put you down like that. I feel like I don't think I could handle the guilt of that. I think I would rather have you die for something you actually did. Plus, if we were doing the podcast, I feel like I could use that as leverage.
Wait, what?
I feel like if you and I were still doing the podcast, ignoring the death the death penalty part of this, I feel like if you and I were still doing the podcast, I could use it on like leverage for like trying to make sure that we like do a show some week. Like, are we going to put out a show this week? I don't know. There's no news. Remember when I didn't turn you into to the cops for killing people? You know what, yeah. James? You're right. We should do a show. You know what? Can I edit it? How do we make this easier?
That's a good point. I didn't think about it like because you just said leverage. I didn't know you meant leverage over me. Yeah, that would be a good way to get me to do a lot of stuff.
There we go. We figured out how to leverage this. I'm becoming more okay with this. I'm sorry, Don. You might have to go to jail for this. All right. So that is going to be it for this week's episode. We should be putting out more content here in the coming weeks now that the real grind of nothingness is going to start to lift. So that is going to be it for us. Again, if you have any ideas as far as potential locations for a live show, if you'd like to send it to us at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, or if you would like to put it in the show on the show notes, I guess on the comment section of the Daily Norseman page, or just send it to NorseCodeDN on Twitter. Arif, do you have anything to plug before we're done?
Yeah, I started working on the training camp guide, which is going to be part of something you'll be able to access with the Zone Coverage Premium membership. Just like last year, it's $20, except now you also get access to a bunch of exclusive content for the NBA, the NHL, the MLS, and the MLB, as well as any other sports that come up. I don't know that we have exclusive content yet for the WNBA, but we may soon. Otherwise, it's all kind of out there ahead of the paywall. But yeah, the Zone Coverage Training Camp Guide is going to cost the same as it did before, but now you're going to get a whole bunch with it. Might even get a shirt. No, you will get a shirt. The question is whether or not it's the generic Zone Coverage shirt or like one that they've been working on that has like my face on it. Hopefully you get to choose.
You have merch with your face on it now?
They do. I don't have merch. That's not me. It's them.
Can we talk later about the potential of selling merch with your face on it?
No, we will not talk about that.
Remember that time I didn't put you in jail?
But yeah, so hopefully you get to choose which shirt. So if you don't want to walk around with my face, you have that option. You also get like gift cards to like B-Dubs and MyBurger and stuff like that. So I'm working on that. In the meantime, I've also got a piece up on Danielle Hunter coming up soon about what the expectations are for a player with his contract. I've got a piece up already on Mackenzie Alexander, and maybe I'll have time to do a Laquan Treadwell piece. We'll see. But those are kind of the things I'm working on.
Another Treadwell piece?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, who knows?
He's certainly talked about enough when you start to think about who the third receiver is.
Right, yeah. Kendall Wright.
Exactly. Kendall Wright. Well, that is going to be it for the show. Again, if you like it, go ahead and subscribe to us on iTunes. We're on YouTube and all sorts of wonderful ways that you can listen to the show. So, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And remember to continue to demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.